Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, Katie and I are going to be discussing a recent trip that we took and some inspirational things that occurred along the way. For those of you that enjoy this podcast, I tell you what, we are grateful when you share this with friends or family. Maybe you send it out to the family text thread, or you just send the link in like a group email. Yeah, actually get all your email contacts. They would love this. And just send out a mass email. No, but it is fun meeting more of you that listen to our podcast and finding out that you hear about it through your network. You know, we're not active on social media, and so the podcast doesn't go out as often via there, but it goes out, I feel like, more organically through networks, and that's fun because then I feel like that gives us a closer connection to these different networks. Does that make sense?
It's also holier, so. No, I'm kidding.
No, meaning like it's fun to. You feel like you know the people that are listening because you meet them, and then
you're always like a degree of connection away. Yeah, it's really fun. You're like, oh, you know so and so, and I know so and so, or you heard about it through this person we know. So that is really fun.
Exactly. So thank you to all those that have helped grow this podcast so that we can do it and that we get to enjoy doing it. We're able to have sponsors now, which is a huge blessing. And we hope that it continues to be a blessing to you. So with that said, let's get this thing rolling.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
I had all these things I was going to say at the start of the podcast. Now I forget what all of them were.
Yeah, well, we just got back from another trip. I tell you what, this summer has been one for the ages. Katie and I talked about it. It's nice being on the same page. I know maybe 4 or 5 episodes ago, maybe it was longer ago, who knows. We talked about staying united through seasons of transition and kind of complicated seasons. And it has been so helpful having things to look back at where we both in clarity and objectivity committed to and agreed upon, because then when you hit those things, halfway through the year or 3/4 of the way through the year, and they seem stressful or they're harder than what you anticipated, you're able to really not play the blame game, which you should never do anyways, right? But some things make it easier to not do than others. And I think being able to go back and say, yeah, we agreed to all these things at the beginning of the year is so helpful. And then, of course, having grace for each other because things come up, like on occasional weekends when there's like maybe a barbecue that one of us didn't expect that we were committed to, that there needs to be.
I told you about that. I gave you a plenty big heads up, I feel like.
Yeah, and I'm obviously being cheeky because I realize how, like, petty I'm being when I, when I begrudge things like that. But it is the point that I'm trying to make is that this summer's been one. It's been one for the ages. We've loved it. It's been incredible. The blessings have been really many. They've been multiple blessings, many blessings. But it's also been fatiguing. And so it's been nice to be able to point back and be like, hey, we agreed to this. Let's stick through it together. And that's kept us very united.
Well, I think the trick of this summer has not actually even been the tent, because it does take more energy to live in the tent than anywhere else. Like, we're going to have freed up energy when we move into a home with amenities. But I think what's been really fatiguing, and which is why since being married, I've never enjoyed summers, or they've been my least favorite season, is because it comes with so much travel. And I'm really a homebody. Like, I prefer to be home. That's when you see progress and structure, and it's easier to have routines and rhythms. And since we've established those in the tent, this has felt like home, which has been really encouraging, because for a while it felt like we were on an extended trip in a tent, and it was like, is this going to feel like all summer? But then it started to feel like home because we did get those routines and rhythms, and we have those here. And so now this is our restful place. And all the travel's really hard. And so actually we were just coming home from being gone for 7 days. No, we weren't gone 7 days. This one was only 5 days. So it wasn't very long. It was a pretty long road trip and to Northern California. And Elisha and I were writing out all these different circles of the communities we're a part of, and are kind of like, okay, these are all primary communities for a lot of the people involved in them. we're a part of a lot of different communities. And so then you feel like you're dropping the ball in other communities when the 7 families in that community are doing everything together and you can't keep pace.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to also do that with this community and with this community and with this one. And a lot of them are family communities, but then we have local communities. And anyways, just kind of thinking through what is healthy for our family to commit to, what is obligatory and unhelpful, and where do you draw that line of connecting in a healthy way with people, and then where do you say we can't make it, and let people down, and that's not fun to do. So anyways, we're trying to sort through that because we don't want another summer like this summer, as rewarding as it's been. It has been very fatiguing on the social commitment side and the travel side. So anyways, we're trying to process that right now because there's a lot of incredible people in our lives that we love very much. We want to know that we love very much. And it's like, how do you navigate that well? I'm not sure.
Yeah, because we think of it from our perspective, but then, again, going back to some sort of filter, like a giant, your dad's giant 5 filter, where you're like, okay, what is, because you said obligatory earlier on, and there are some things that just straight up are obligatory as Christians, I would say, whether or not you feel they are helpful to your long-term vision or not. And then there are some things where maybe you feel obligated, but you don't necessarily need to feel obligated, or it's on a scale, it's to various degrees. And so when we look at our life, it's like, well, you and I are homebodies. We love being with each other. We were blessed to be able to go on a date last night, which was so life-giving. That was so great. We love where we live. We feel this kind of like total contentment that I'm sure a lot of couples can relate to when they get married, they have a few kids, and they're like, well, all the people I care the most about are right here. So like, let's just do another family walk. Let's go for another family hike to the lake. And Katie and I can just live our whole life doing that, it feels like, at this point. But then you have your children, and you need to think of their future and their relationships. And then also our extended family relationships and the friendships. And you go on and on and on. You realize, well, of course, we're not created to live isolated and alone on an island and to separate ourselves from people. And so then you have to have some sort of filter through which you can make these decisions on commitments.
To give people context, though, we're maybe together as only a family once or twice a week this summer. So it's not like we don't have evening obligations or social obligations or trips once or twice a week. That's it. Right. So it's not like Elisha and I are just isolating. We're a far cry from isolation right now.
That's probably why it sounds nice. Because we never do it.
I was like, this is not like, oh man, there's something we have to go to this week. Bummer. It's like 3 times a day, or a lot of 7 or 9 day trips that we've been on this summer. So, anyways.
Anyway, and this is like, we weren't even going to talk about that on this episode. Classic, like, real-time processing, because we feel abundant. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this most recent trip, is this undeserved blessing that we've received through family relationships. It is remarkable because we oftentimes point to the salvation that we've received through Jesus Christ, and we think, how undeserving. Like, what was I doing when he died on the cross for my sins? What was I doing when he lived a perfect and sinless life on my behalf? The whole nature of our salvation is, well, it's grace, and it's something that we don't deserve. We didn't even know how to look for it. And yet he bought us, he purchased us, and he redeemed us. And you think, how undeserving. But then you really start to realize every single part of our life is so undeserving, and it's taken place apart from any of our forethought, right? When I think of the family we had 2 kind of different family experiences this most recent road trip, and you think how far back the Lord's been working in your family and in my family to bring us to this point of having children, of being married, of being on a property, of doing the business that we're doing, of having the friendships that we have. Like, you can point to every single good thing in our life, and you're like, wow, this is so gracious of the Lord to bring this about. And it feels like it really does have nothing to do with things that we did in our life.
Yeah, and I think that's actually why this applies.
Yeah.
Our fatigue. It is trying to figure out this is an incredible gift. We want to raise our children. We are a part of a multi-generational legacy, and we want our children to know those people, to have that support as they grow up, to pour into those people. And we do feel more and more called to family relationships.
Yes.
And then it's also trying to figure out how that looks with the nuclear family, because in Elisha's and my family, we are blessed to have Christian grandparents on both sides, Christian cousins on both sides. So even like this, reunion trip we were on was my mom's side of the family. So it's like, you guys know my family I'm one of 11 kids, Elisha's one of 10. But then we go up further to like my dad's aunts and uncles and cousins and his side of the family, and then my mom's side of the family. And so it just gets really big, and there's literally over 1,000 people involved. And so you go, wow, we really are so blessed to be a part of this. It's insane. Hopefully it just continues growing,
Yes.
Hopefully we just populate, Christians like the Israelites over here, and it becomes millions. And to what extent are you involved in that? Like what has God called us to in terms of relational connection inside of this? So something that was really cool was we did a 2-day trip. So on the way to this family reunion, we stopped halfway at my parents' house, and they're living currently with my grandfather, my father's father. And they did their Sabbath evening there, and we were able to sit down, and something that my parents have started implementing in their Friday night Sabbath dinner is something that they got from Jeremy Pryor, which I thought was so cool. And that is, they put these little, I don't know exactly how Jeremy explains doing it, but how we did it at my family's was they put out pictures on the table of my great-grandparents, so like my grandfather's parents, and just every week they go over different ancestors, and it's a time to focus on your history, where you came from. And we see this with the Israelites. We see how, they're always going back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There were so many times when the Lord said, okay, erect an altar of stones here. So when your children ask, what is this? You can tell them what I've done. And it was an oral tradition back then. And so stories were told. And we have so much information online these days. We just think, well, if I'm interested, I can look it up. I can look up my family ancestry. I can do all that. But you miss the nuance and the depth and the richness of going to someone older in your family and saying, how was your mother? How was your father? And you get stories, which is what we did when we all sat down after eating, from my grandfather of amazing, like his dad going and bringing home in the middle of the night. He remembers waking up as a 6-year-old and his mom hustling all the kids at 2 a.m. into their room because his dad was bringing home a bunch of drunks. And in the morning he woke up to breakfast being made and his dad evangelizing to them downstairs. And like, you don't find that on Google, know? And so I think it really places a importance on the elderly, because we can often think in like our fast-paced, hyper-productive world, like, well, one, I can get all the information I need elsewhere and a lot faster. And two, they are kind of rambly when they tell stories. And I think I think when we don't value our family heritage and we don't value those rabbit trails and just the like, tell me more, then we also, I think that's come with a devaluing of the personhood of the older generation, because it just seems like, well, we have everything we need without them.
Yeah, that's a crazy way to put it, and I think you're right. I think technology has made us worse storytellers. You think of how we document everything in real time. With video and with photos, and then we share about it, and then you ask somebody to explain a trip that they went on, and we're not as equipped to do it. Celebrate Labor Day the American way with a grill out featuring top quality American meat from GoodRanchers.com. All of their products are sourced exclusively from local family farms. 0 antibiotics or hormones. Okay, got that. 0 antibiotics or hormones. I think it's saying or and then hormones back to back. That's tricky. Or hormones. Does that make sense?
It's a little tricky.
Or hormones. There we go. Pre-trimmed and individually packed. It makes eating healthy and trustworthy food easy. They are the place to get steaks, burgers, chicken, pork, and wild-caught seafood that will amaze you. We can attest to that.
That's true. Yes.
Everything they deliver to your door tastes the way it should because it's raised responsibly and expertly cut and inspected for quality. If you eat meat, you should be buying from Good Ranchers. This Labor Day, they're offering an incredible deal. Subscribe to any Good Ranchers box now and get a free add-on for 1 year. That's a full year of free plain chicken breast, Angus ground beef, Applewood bacon, or wild-caught salmon with every order. And with my exclusive...
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm excited about the customization of that.
Okay, just wait and then celebrate when I was just starting to get into the flow with my reading. And then, no, I'm joking. And with my exclusive, or really our exclusive code, VOTEBERG, you'll also get $25 off your first box and free express shipping. That's up to $400 in savings. You can start a subscription or do a one-time purchase. If you subscribe and use my code VOTEBERG at checkout to get $25 off your first box, free express shipping, and your free add-on for 1 year. Trust me, this isn't like other subscriptions where you have to jump through 10 hoops just to pause or cancel anytime. Good Ranchers puts the power in your hands to pause, push, or cancel anytime because they're confident you'll love the product. Isn't that so nice? And
it is.
Having a business, a subscription business, a Voteberg Music Academy, that is so deeply our desire. And for those of you that are our customers, that's what we want so badly, is to make that the experience. I love the Good Ranchers makes that the experience. Okay, by choosing Good Ranchers, you're removing the mystery of the meat aisle. Get the quality, transparency, and flavor you need. Proudly support the best of the USA and fire up the grill with meat that's born, raised, and made right here in America. Don't miss out. Use our code VOTEBERG to grab this Labor Day special and enjoy great savings while supporting American farms. GoodRanchers.com. American meat delivered. But then when you are able to talk to, the older generation, whether it's our parents or our grandparents or, even our children's great-grandparents, you get to hear stories that, again, were not documented, things that you can't Google, like you said, things that are just firsthand accounts that get passed on through their memory, through their storytelling, and it really is precious. And I think that that's a really honoring thing to do. We want to honor our parents, we want to honor our grandparents, and listening to them is one of the most basic ways I think we can honor them, is asking questions about their life and then being able to glean from their wisdom, from their experiences, and from their memories is not only an amazing opportunity for our well-being, right? Like it enhances our life, but it also blesses them and really is a way to honor our elders.
Yeah, I was so grateful. Our kids were able to hear these stories, and for whatever reason, I'm really valuing them now because I've heard a lot of this growing up, and it just didn't seem to apply. I don't think I had a perspective that it mattered where we came from. It just wasn't a value system I had, and that was just, I don't know, maybe my age or my stage. But I feel like I really want our kids to care. Like, I want to let them know this is something to value right now. And it's just so cool when you see who you came from, you have more responsibility where you're at. And I mean, that means even if you look at your family lineage and you're like, wow, it was a desolate lineage. And like the Lord chose to start something new with me and our family. That's a beautiful responsibility. But it's still helpful to know where you came from and what the Lord has overcome in your family lineage. Right. And so I think that regardless of whether this is encouraging, I think it's encouraging either way, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, in fact, I would say that in recent history, we've done a better job actually of highlighting really negative, and dysfunctional family lineages, because that does get highlighted, and as it should, when people get saved out of dysfunction, when people are brought up in. Sorry, my mic keeps like shifting here.
Usually I have that one.
Oh, is that what
because,
it is?
Because, yeah, okay. I'm like, this is rock solid.
Those are the testimonies we love hearing, and rightfully so. I'm not trying to throw shade on these testimonies, but when somebody didn't know either their parents and they were on the streets and they were addicted to drugs, or they were in the, sex trafficking industry, and they were whatever. Like you hear these dramatic stories, or they were, in Islam, they were a Muslim and they were in that faith. And then they get saved out of that. We love hearing those stories, and that always highlights the dysfunction of their upbringing. And that's again, I love those stories. I'm not
Yeah, because
trying.
it's redemptive.
It's redemptive, and you're able to see, wow, look what God has done. But you still actually value hearing their story. Like, you still actually value hearing, like, no way, like, your parents were addicted to drugs, and then they wanted to abort you, and then somebody came along and adopted you, and you never met your parents, and then you were brought up in this environment. God's so faithful, and you still use the story of your family to show God's faithfulness. Again, I think we should continue to do that when God saves people from those situations. But then I think we've neglected sharing the stories of God's faithfulness through multiple generations, where you're saying, oh man, no way, your great-great-grandfather, was, or for our kids' instance, like their great-great-great-great-grandfather, Lyman, right, 4 greats,
Yeah.
was writing Christian articles back in the 1800s, to 10,000 subscribers of like physical print.
Bi-monthly. This was
Yes.
all typeset. And I don't even know how you get a readership of 10,000 back in the 1800s.
Yeah.
And so that's the fun thing, though, is through these stories and through just us visiting and hearing from Grandpa, we were going up the line kind of like, okay, he's like, I know 6 generations up that are all believers. And so we're kind of going up the patriarchs of that family line. Again, looking at pictures, looking at the back of pictures, kind of connecting the dots. And it was such a treasure hunt because then someone mentioned what was it called? It was called the Stumbling Stone. Isn't that a sweet title of a paper? And so my dad was like, I actually got those reprinted from the originals. So he brings in this giant book with every single one of the articles in the Stumbling Stone. And so we're all flipping through these as a family, and we're able to see, other siblings mentioned, and then we see his grandma mentioned. And so then we're going up, and we're literally this lady, and I cannot remember her name, but she came over on the Mayflower and was saying the problem with the church at the time, which is funny because it's exactly what people would say the problems with the church are now, which is it used to be better a generation ago. And but I think that was what was so cool too, is because one, you guys know, we just read The Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism.
This was surreal. It
was so surreal, and it was so cool because Lyman was, so my great-great-great-grandpa was this huge, like, he was drinking the Kool-Aid. He was this evangelist for dispensationalism. And so it was crazy to read these papers and read the headlines and see all of the
titles he was going.
All the titles, like the Holiness Movement, or how to have a plain reading of the Bible, or a lot of focus, obviously, on the resurrection and the rapture and baptism, why you shouldn't be baptized, why that's a part of the old covenant. It was so fascinating.
And so we're fresh off reading this book, and so we were talking about it with Katie's parents and then Katie's grandfather, Burnell, and we're saying these names of people. It's like, oh yeah, like my grandpa knew him. Like they were.
I was like, was
friends.
he like a part of the Brethren? He's like, oh no, we weren't a part of the Brethren, but like
so and so was though.
Yeah, it was like no way.
And they were like an offshoot, and it was just so fun hearing, like you said, we were fresh off reading this book, and then to hear actual family stories from the kid's great-great-great-great-grandfather and other people that we were related to, that they were a big part of this movement and they were right in the thick of it. It's pretty inspirational and fascinating.
Yeah, hearing how he got saved, how he went to seminary, how he did not appreciate, how he really just felt like sectarianism was destroying the church. And anyways, but it's fascinating because it was just a living history of that time in history. And this
from people within our family.
Yeah, exactly. From this guy who loved the Lord so much, was very zealous. His son Burnell, it's not my grandpa Burnell, but a grade up the line, started a similar paper titled The Searchlight. So then we dug that up and are passing around the Searchlight. And again, it was just like a family treasure hunt, finding names and stories and tracking down our lineage that way. And it's like, yeah, you could do a 23andMe ancestry test, but this was, 50 of us in a room, just stoked.
Yep.
All the generations digging this up, and it was just really, really fun. And stuff that stuck out too is, well, one, this book is awesome, and I want one because it was such a combination of family legacy, church history, and American history, like all in one for us. But it was really cool just to see things like John Calvin mentioned in there. So technically, Lyman's theology would be like today someone sharing Grandfather Lyman's theology would be starkly opposed to John Calvin's theology.
That's how we would frame it. It would be like,
that's how today those would be the camps today, I would say. But it was so cool to hear him praising the Lord for John Calvin's salvation. And I just think it's like, how often does that happen too in history, where it's like two Christians are serving the Lord alongside each other? Like maybe, one of our listeners and their friend, and you differ on theology, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're like, whatever, the bigger picture is all these things. We agree on the major issues, and like we're both serving the Lord together. We have a little different bent in our theology. And then, decades later and generations later, people who learned from both of you are fighting like cats and dogs over this stuff. Where back in the day, you saw each other on the same team, which is like we're both spreading the gospel.
Well, that's the whole because people say this all the time, like John Calvin didn't come up with Calvinism, like his followers did, and that's probably going to happen for generations and generations to come, where two people could be shoulder to shoulder, doing the Lord's work and pushing in the same direction and differing on important issues, but feeling very united in their pursuit. And then you get 100 years removed and people are reading what they wrote and they're like, well, man, what team are you on? And all of a sudden these factions are.
Hey, you guys, I just wanted to tell you real quick about my homeschooling course, Homeschooling the First 3 Years. It's all about laying a foundation of joy and confidence and fun and simplified homeschool in your home. So if you're in a place where maybe you're considering homeschooling your kiddos in the next few years, then this course is for you. It's going to break down not only what we do for homeschool in our family and what we've done for the first 3 years in homeschool, but it's also going to show you exactly how that looks. So I'm going to take a camera around with me vlog style and show you how does it look to homeschool with a baby? How does it look to homeschool with a toddler? How does it look to homeschool multiple grades at one time? How do you navigate different learning tendencies? How do you navigate your learning style as a teacher? And how do you motivate children and get them to love learning? I love homeschooling my kids. One of my favorite things that I get to do with them each day, and it's something that I want you to love doing with your children as well. So if you look down in the description box, you will be able to find a discount code where you can get a discount off of Homeschool the First 3 Years, and I really hope that it blesses your home.
Are caused.
And that's why I think it's so cool to read church history, because you actually see how so many believers did see themselves as united, and I believe they were united, and that they were both Christians, and they were both in the Lord's army, and like moving his kingdom forward and submitted to his will, and they were both imperfect. And I think that's beautiful, and I think that's something we lose when we don't look at church history, or even through the stories of the people who lived it. That was something else. It's like you could read church history and hear about the wars, hear about the Christians killing each other, or you can read through a perspective of someone who served alongside someone else and see the names that come up. And it's like, oh, they were both preachers, they were both teachers, their hearts were both bleeding for the lost and wanting to disciple them. That's a really beautiful thing, and I think we miss that when we get away from maybe the biography or autobiographies and just go history style or textbook style with our church history. So that was something that stuck out.
Yeah, I'd say gratitude was the sentiment we all came away with from there, and just excitement, and we were inspired. And then anyways, you were about to move on, probably. Were you about to move on?
No.
Or, but something that we've also talked about since then, because there's like a spiritual legacy and heritage that we've inherited, but then just the physical heritage and legacy is so fun to learn about, because people we talked about this, I think, when we were talking about leaving our children an inheritance, or children entitled children, but the fact is that we just all do have an inheritance, and are you acknowledging it or not? And if you aren't, and again, I'm coming from somebody that I think is objectively, by anybody's standards, crazy blessed, both physically, like spiritually, with the legacy and the heritage that I have, and yet I had to train myself to identify those things. And then once you start identifying it, you realize that every single person you encounter has just this life, it's so undeserving. Like the breath in our lungs, the beats of our heart are, it's like, wow, that is not something that like I picked myself up by my bootstraps and earned. Like, or this morning when I got up and I had life, it's not like, well, it's because I did X, Y, and Z and I really worked hard to have. It's like God chose to give me another day. He's chosen to give us each breath. Like he is actively says he's, what does it Colossians say? Like he's in all things, and by him all things consist. It's like he is actively giving us each breath. And so we're so prone to saying, man, that's such a God moment, or that's like, what a supernatural event. And you're like, honestly, each breath is a God moment for our lives that he has ordained. And I think that that's really humbling, and it's really sobering for me to consider, because you realize, boy, how am I going to steward the next breath, or the next day, or the next step, or the next dollar that the Lord blesses me with, or the next child, or what have you.
Yeah. So I just think, anyways, that was something that was really encouraging to us, and something that I guess we want to institute, or what I love, I guess, what the priors are sharing is kind of like this habit stacking of, okay, you have this Sabbath dinner. What are you going to do at the Sabbath dinner? This is a great time to look back at the Lord's faithfulness. And say maybe you don't have any older relatives who'd be able to relay these stories to you. Or say, you kind of talk about your family history a couple nights, and then you're kind of like, there's not much more here that we want to discuss. I do think something that's cool is going up generations, because you can see maybe where there was a break in the line. But then going up further, you look at the Israelites, it's like they had Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you also have Korah and, all these other people who were breaks in the line.
Yes.
And then the line gets picked back up. And so I think that's a beautiful thing too, to just keep going back in history and see, okay, maybe you're going back to, it's a great study of church history. It's a great study of history in like biblical history. It's like, how far do we have to go back to where we see God has had this faithfulness and we're picking back up this torch here? Because I guarantee it's not just, regardless of where your parents are or even your grandparents are, you have a godly relative somewhere in that history. And it's a really cool study. So it's something that I want to do in our home, is start sharing these oral traditional stories with our kids and learning ourselves about their grandparents, where they came from, why it matters, their family lineage. You could go into your cultural heritage. And then if you wanted, you could just do like a study of church history too during Sabbath. But it's cool to have something you're like studying and learning and discussing that's different and out of the norm from like your normal Bible time or something like that. So I was really inspired.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, because it's fun even as we're going up the line. It's not like everybody just picked up the torch and there is this clean line of, then he was a pastor, then he was a pastor, then he was a pastor, or like they were a great father, then they were a better father, then it wasn't that clean. I don't think it ever is, because of sin and because of our fallen nature. But even in the midst of it, you're able to see, but man, they were able to go live with their grandma, who was a godly woman. And you're like, what a blessing, right there. Or he walked away for a bit and there was this strained relationship. And then 30 years later, there was this restoration. And you get to hear that story and you're like, whoa, no way. And so it really is powerful when you hear those stories. And again, it's always just highlighting, in my mind, God's faithfulness and how he chooses to be so kind to mankind and work through us with his, through his sovereign plan and through his means. It's really miraculous. And I want my children to be able to look for that in their lineage, and of course we haven't stopped talking about it since then. And I actually even reached out to my sister Bryce, because when she was younger, I'd say I was probably like 8 or 9 or 10. And she's 4 years older than me, so she would have been like 12 or 13. She really got obsessive about our family legacy. And so my great grandma Votberg was living at the time. She was close to 90 years of age, and it was her parents that came over from Holland. So those were some of our ancestors that came over from Holland. And my sister was able to sit down with her and get a ton of history, and she wrote all this down. Who married who, where did they come over, like where did they settle first when they came over, to New York, and then where'd they go from there. And then there were some Votbergs that landed in in Michigan, and in Michigan, and then there's some that continued out west. One of the brothers continued out west. That's how we were able to be on the West Coast, was because these people kept coming out. And and at the time I was like, why are you nerding out on this? Like, let's just live our life here. And I reached out to her. I was like, how much history do you still have? Because it's so important, I think, that we grab that, and then you're able to look back and give God so much praise and thanks because of how He sustained your life. And again, you take even the spiritual well-being out of it. People that come say it's like, man, there's no Christians on my side, or they. Like my mom was an alcoholic and a drunk, never knew me, or my dad left, when I was a kid. It's like God sustained your biological line to you. Isn't that crazy? And now you have an opportunity to start this new, like what we talked about, spiritual line, perhaps, which is highly lauded in the scriptures. You think of Abraham, we've mentioned this time and time again, that father of many nations, and to think that you could be that patriarch, generations down the road, where it's like, dude, this guy or this gal was saved out of this desolate situation, spiritually speaking or physically speaking, and was able to start this line. It's pretty cool. I think, yeah. Anyways, we've become, as you can probably hear, pretty big advocates of learning about our families.
Yeah, I mean, you do think of Abraham, though. Like, his dad, was Terah his dad or his father-in-law? I get those two mixed up, but Abraham was the first. And, like, we look to Abraham
his dad was
as
pagan.
this leader, but, his dad was a total pagan. Yeah. And so it's like, we look at what the Lord chose to do through Abraham, and it wasn't because he was raised with a godly heritage and came with his pedigree. Yeah. He started something with him. And so I think, but like Elisha said, you have to view yourself as the patriarch and as the matriarch that the Lord is going to use, and treat that seriously, educate our children seriously in the gospel and in who God is, and just take on that responsibility, because I think it's really easy to kind of look back and be like, oh, well, not much was really given to me in terms of this whole legacy piece, and so not much is required of me in terms of this whole legacy piece, but that's not how God does it, and He calls us up to things that we never dreamed.
Yeah, well, because that's what's insane about becoming a Christian, is you are brought into the household of God instantly. You're not a second-rate citizen ever. There are no second-rate citizens, and so you have been given all things that pertain unto life and godliness. It behooves Him to call us brothers, and so you really have this place of royalty from the time you're saved, and we're all called ambassadors, like representatives of Jesus Christ, to everybody that we're around. But if you're a parent or if you're a spouse, first and foremost to your spouse and children. And so to take that position, I think, seriously, to be, to not look at maybe even your earthly station as being like everything that you are, to be like, whoa, like there is a heavenly title that I've been given here, and it is son, and it is daughter, and it's joint heirs. You're like, we are reigning jointly with Christ. That's crazy. Like, that's what the Bible tells us in so many different ways and in so many different passages. And so to live into that reality is really something that I think we should all seek to do.
Yeah, so it was fun going to my grandparents' house, and then we continued journeying to our Johnston family reunion, which is JH Ranch, which was at JH Ranch, which is a Christian camp that my grandfather started on the other side, Gene Johnston. And so it is kind of fun to run into people all over the country that have gone to JH Ranch. It's a totally different vibe at JH Ranch than so I want to say it this way. I think it was so encouraging being there this year, because 4 years ago we had just watched, Elisha's texting family as we speak.
Well, some families coming to visit here.
We're excited.
Shortly.
They're coming all the way from Tennessee,
yes.
Right? And so we need to make sure they find the campsite. Yes. So anyways, that's what's going on. It's all on topic.
Yes, exactly.
But it's still kind of throwing me off.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. So anyways, so 4 years ago, I think was right around when we'd first watched the American Gospel. If we'd watched it a year sooner, we are still fresh off this whole new perspective of what God has truly done. I feel like I really understood the gospel in depth for the first time. And there were just a lot of things that I'd grown up believing, even things like, Jesus sacrificed his son, instead of seeing as God and Jesus, well, they are one. It's the Trinity. And so God, yes, he sacrificed his son, but in that he took his wrath upon himself. He didn't pour out his wrath just on his son.
Right.
He took the wrath and internalized the wrath because God and Jesus are
one.
right? So there was all these different things that like really stuck out in my mind, and I was just like, the gospel is where it's at. And then I started, which it is.
Yeah.
I mean,
Amen.
there's nothing more incredible than what God's done for us in that redemptive power. But then I started reading all of these people on American gospel, and they were very reformed. And so I was on this big time reform kick. And then the other thing with the American gospel is they really were pointing out the prosperity gospel, kind of taking it down, like calling out the prosperity gospel and where the prosperity gospel has been taken too far. And so I think I had a big chip on my shoulder towards anyone who is somewhat connected to Bethel or some of these more charismatic churches.
Like Benny Hinn.
Yeah,
or,
Benny Hinn.
Yeah, Joel Osteen. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Which the ranch has ties with, these different, it's a more charismatic place. So anyways, I think I went in with a very judgy Christian mindset. It's say Christian, but it wasn't a Christian mindset. It was just a judgy mindset. And it's been so cool to just see how the Lord has worked in our hearts even over the last 4 years, because I've gone deeper down the rabbit trails that I was going down at the time, but where they led me was to just this overwhelming gratitude for the gospel going out for Christians everywhere, and the way that the gospel's going out, and not picking apart, I guess, different aspects of Christianity, but just really seeing, wow, this is all the Lord's work. This is all marvelous. I'm not saying heretical stuff.
Well, yeah, the Lord's working, and there are flaws in different campaigns, I would say.
Yes.
There are things that probably should be called out, and people should continue to reform, continue to refine their theology and their teachings and repent from false teachings, and all of that needs to continue to happen within the greater church. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. I'm not just saying, and it's all good, like
right.
You do whatever you want, and there's no accountability in Scripture or anything like that. I'm not saying that. I think each of us is under that accountability, each church, each pastor.
And when we say even like those other churches or people that we mentioned before, the ranch isn't those people too.
No, they aren't. And that's more what I was saying.
Yeah.
I was going into the ranch being like, they have a different style of faith, or a different even theology, or on different issues. But I've come to not see those differences, I guess, as differences that are undermining the gospel or his word going out or what the Lord's doing. I don't know quite how to explain it.
Yeah, I don't know either, because I'm with you. 4 years ago, it's like we definitely were like kind of arms crossed in our heart posture, and just kind of criticizing anytime we felt like somebody wasn't articulating the gospel in the way that we felt was truly, accurate. And in this go around, it's not like we've stopped believing that the gospel needs to be clearly articulated as 100% work of God. You start to see that, we've probably grown in humility and realized like our theology is flawed, and on some level everybody's going to die with, faulty theology, and we're saved by the grace of God. But then you also realize that like people pushing for some of the things they're pushing for, we're a lot more aligned in, the advancement of the kingdom of the gospel going out, of people being reached. And I think that if anything, we were really concerned that like, oh man, people are mixing morality and Christian ethics with the gospel, or people are reaching, philanthropy and whatever with the gospel. Like the gospel needs to be at the root of all these things, and then the fruit will come. And I think that we've come to realize like, the gospel is what fuels all those things, but everybody's understanding of the gospel, ourselves, included, is going to vary, and it hopefully deepen as our life continues. And so to say, man, don't go perform Christian duties and tasks until you are sure your only confidence is in the gospel, because then that's legalism, or then you're trying to earn your righteousness, and you're just becoming self-righteous and whatever. It's like we should obey God. We should go try to reach the nations. We should be giving to the poor. We should be servicing the widows and the orphans, and we should grow in our nurture and admonition of the Lord, and grow in our understanding of the gospel, and get more and more confident in that finished work. And so you realize like, oh man, I'm somewhere on the spectrum. We're all somewhere on the spectrum when it comes to our understanding of the gospel and whether or not that's at the root and the heart of everything that we do. But you don't want to sit there on your hands and say, well, I'm not going to go out and, be charitable to this people group, or I'm not going to go, preach that people shouldn't sleep together, because then they'll think that not sleeping together is going to make them a Christian. And so I'm not going to say that, and again, this gets into even gets into politics and talking morality. And you're kind of like, well, no, we should tell people that, yes, sex is reserved for the marriage bed, and it's for one woman and for one man. And you should say those things. And yes, you should preach the gospel. And like, will they convolute the two? Will they get confused on which the one? Like, yeah, we all get confused all the time on where our righteousness is coming from. But it doesn't mean you don't go out and say, hey, like, transgenderism is a terrible demonic thing, for fear that people will then think that they're a Christian because they're anti-transgenderism. Does that make sense?
And yes, and the Holy Spirit does convict too. So it's like we're leaving out the Holy Spirit because he makes clear what is the gospel and what is morality. There's a blessing in Christian morals to all those who come in contact with Christian morals. And the Lord will clarify. I'm not worried about someone being confused. There will be a blessing from them following God's law no matter what. And then as they're interested in God's law or study scripture or these things, the Lord will convict who he's going to convict and bring to himself who he's going to bring to himself. So I think having that confidence in just God doing the finished work really is very liberating. And I think the other thing too is actually reading again that book, The Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism, and seeing when it snuck in to the church, where we started saying the church needs to be evangelized instead of saying the church needs to be discipled. That's really changed in my mind. So now when I see Christians that maybe I think I would have called a nominal Christian before, or I would have said, I don't really think they understand the Bible. Maybe they're just a professing Christian, or groups of Christianity like that, where you're like, okay, well, yeah, we're like praying here on Sunday, but it's maybe more a little Bible Belt Christianity where it's like, I'm still sleeping with my boyfriend and getting drunk on the weekends kind of thing. You're like, well, that person needs to be evangelized. And instead of just taking Christians at face value and being like, this is a bunch of baby Christians, they all say they're Christians, so I'm going to just believe that, and I'm going to step in that role. They need to be discipled. They need to hear what God's done for them and what he's called them to.
That he hates sin, and that this
he
is
hates
a
sin, and we need to call each other out.
We need accountability.
Exactly. They don't need to be told, you need to be saved.
Right.
I think that creates a lot more confusion. And I think that is the attitude that I had 4 years ago, going to the ranch and thinking, well, I think a lot of the people that come here are just like nominal Christians, right. Not the leadership, but a lot of the, the kids or the youth that come through. And I was thinking, and the gospel isn't super clear in terms of what I think my definition of a clear gospel is. So I think they need to be evangelized too. All these kids saying they're Christians, instead of being like, no, like, praise the Lord, they're being saved here. The evangelism is happening, and now discipleship needs to keep happening. And if a bunch of Christians that do know the Bible better are going around just judging the ones that don't, then they don't get discipled.
Dude, that's convicting.
Yeah, I've been super convicted.
That's exactly where my heart posture has been for so much of my life, is like, they're not a real Christian. Just having these qualifications that was beyond just their profession of faith, and not at all giving them a chance to grow in their faith, to mature, to repent from sin. Not at all myself not at all being obedient to the scriptures of what it says fellow Christians are supposed to do when other Christians are living in sin. Like there was zero part of me that felt any obligation, and that's what it's crazy. It takes away the obligation when you say they're not a real Christian, right? Because we don't feel that obligated to call out somebody that's a professing atheist on their fornication. We just feel obligated to preach the gospel to them and to not at all get in the nitty-gritty of their life. And we take that same kind of like, well, we're not going to actually get into the weeds with people and their lifestyle and their lifestyle and their sinful choices because they're not really a Christian. And so we'll just pray for their salvation, and preach the gospel. It's pretty crazy. It's really convicting.
Yeah, and these people, it's like, what do they do if they've, they've done what culture says to do, which is like, okay, I prayed a sinner's prayer, I've done an altar call, I've been baptized. Like, what more must I do to be saved, right? And it's like, okay, that repentance part is important, but excuse me, and the Holy Spirit does convict, but he uses the body to convict too.
Yeah.
And to bring each other to repentance.
Right.
And so, anyways, it was just...
he uses the body to discipline. It's like that's where church discipline is carried out, is in the context of a local church.
Yeah.
And so if you're not a part of that local church, if you're not functioning in your role as a body, then there's just huge gaps in that aspect of the local church.
Yeah. So anyways, I think we were just really, really stoked about that side of the family legacy too.
Yes.
I guess wanting our kids to be a part of that instead of being like, well, it's been good, but I don't know.
Oh, it was so humbling just to
It
meet
was
so
really
many,
humbling.
to reconnect with so many of your cousins that, again, like, do we come from different theological standpoints? Probably. Who knows?
We're all Christians.
Yeah, we're all Christians. We truly desire to raise our children. And all the parents are being so intentional in raising their children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Like, both parents are, and all these families are so aligned in that pursuit. Really inspirational, really humbling. And then something else too, going back to the whole lineage piece, is that because again, you track the lineage in this side of the family, and you see this powerful ministry that the Lord's done through their family, through this property, the JH Ranch, through the family, like I said. But you're able to find kind of like where Papa Gene and Mama Joy, it's like Papa Gene was an orphan. Like, I don't think his mom was a Christian.
Well, that's the weird thing. He was raised as an orphan. So his mom didn't want kids, so she put him in an orphanage. Wow. At 2 years old.
Isn't that crazy?
It's so sad.
So that's his legacy. Is it's like, a very unloving, mother. And I guess did he ever know his dad?
I don't think he did.
And this is, our kid's his great grandfather. Yeah, Papa Gene, and he's passed away. And then Mama Joy, and they, both. I don't know what her parents were, if she was if she was in a Christian home or not.
They both got saved at marriage, like right before or after marriage. Yeah. And so we're very new baby believers. Yeah. And something that's so cool to see with their heritage, I feel like, is the gospel and the understanding of the gospel and just the faith strengthening with each generation. Yeah. It's so cool to see because they had no input into their parenting. It was just like, we need to go to church and we need to read the Bible, which are beautiful things, but they had no one speaking into their lives. And then their children had a little bit more of that, but not a ton of aunts and uncles and grandparents. It was just kind of their parents and the churches that they were a part of. And now it's like our generation, we have a dozen aunts and uncles, on that side of the family that are carrying on the faith. And our kids have hundreds of relatives. And I just think it's so beautiful. It's been so beautiful to see kids too who, like cousins who struggled in their faith because they didn't have that support. And then the rest of the family wraps around them.
It's crazy.
And now they're married and having kids and bringing them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And it's just beautiful. It is. And
well, you just think like
amazing.
The like physical resource or like the human resources that we have access to now. So you mentioned your Grandma Joy and Papa Gene were kind of alone, isolated. They're like, okay, well, we need to read the Bible and find a church. They didn't have very much input at all. They raised up their 12 children. Their 12 children had a little bit more because they had parents, at least, that were taking them to church and probably putting them around other Christian people. But now that's the next generation. We have all those aunts and uncles that are godly people, your Uncle Mark, your Aunt Linda, and you go on and on and on. And with that, folks, we're going to come to an abrupt end. There was a bee sting. Somebody got stung by a bee, which happens when you live in the wild. So Katie is tending to the bee sting, and we're just going to call it right there because of that. Everybody's fine. It's a little bee sting. We've had a few of them since living out here, but we're grateful to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.